Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be providing some commentary for the recent blindfold speedrun I did of the original Deus Ex. While we're going through character creation, the main thing I want to talk about here is the setup that makes this run possible. So as I'm sure a lot of you remember, the original Deus Ex was designed to be played on keyboard and mouse, and it really leans heavily into the use of the mouse for a lot of its user interface, much more so than a lot of modern video games. This is problematic for a blindfold speedrun because when you're playing blindfolded, mouse inputs are not nearly precise enough. They're too chaotic. Small changes in your input can result in drastic differences in your output. And as a blindfolded gamer, the thing you want most is repeatability. To solve this problem, what we're going to see here right at the very beginning of the game is I'm using the keys on my numpad to control my mouse cursor. This is thanks to an external piece of software called AutoHotkey. It's very simple. It essentially allows you to bind various inputs to different keys on your keyboard. So I have the different buttons of my numpad used to move my mouse cursor a specific number of pixels. Most of the buttons just move it 100 pixels in a given direction, which is super valuable when you're playing blindfolded because you know every time you touch that button, you're going to get exactly the same result every time. Another important concept to understand about the blindfold route is verification. After attempting any task, the thing you want most is some way of verifying that you've completed the task successfully. In this case, the task is we want to pick up this wooden box because it contains an item that we really need. The problem is that there's no sound effect for when you pick it up. So to verify if we've completed the task successfully, we use the jump key. Our character can jump when their hands are empty, but they can't jump when they're holding something heavy. So the jump key offers us a very convenient way of verifying whether we're holding the box or not. So throughout the whole game, we're going to be looking for opportunities like that to quickly verify when we've done things successfully. Our next big task is to break open this crate so that we can get a gas grenade. Every time you break a crate, the item inside will pop out at a random angle. So what I'm doing here is repeatedly quick loading and breaking the crate over and over again, while trying to listen for the sound of the gas grenade hitting the ground. Here we got super lucky in that the gas grenade landed directly in front of us, so we're able to find it right away. Usually that doesn't happen, so I spend a little bit of time continuing my search pattern, because we won't know when we've picked up the grenade until we check our inventory and listen for the sound of us equipping the grenade, which we're going to do in just a moment here. Alright, quick save. Now that we have our gas grenade, we can use it to perform our first big skip of the run. By throwing the gas grenade in that corner there, the explosion will cause a guard inside to panic, and conveniently for us, his panic AI tells him to run to this locked door and open it for us. This allows us to skip the entire first mission. It can be tricky to find a good setup for this, but once you do, the trick is pretty reliable. Super smooth. Now that we've reached UNATCO headquarters, all we have to do is talk to a few different NPCs before we're allowed to start the next mission. So now's a good opportunity to talk about how movement works. The technique we're going to be using most of the time is just holding a direction until we reach a corner, and then holding a different direction until we reach a different corner. And the reason that this is so reliable is because of how good the sound design is in Deus Ex. Every room has a very distinct sound profile, and there are lots of individual sound emitters like cameras and computers that you can use to pinpoint your position within the room. On top of that, you get a lot of useful information by listening to your footsteps. Footsteps produce different sounds depending on what surface you're walking on, and the cadence of your footsteps will change when you hit a wall. So with all these different sources of information, it's actually fairly straightforward to navigate while playing blindfolded. You often don't need to memorize a series of inputs. Instead, you're memorizing a route and then relying on your visualization and your audio cues to guide you along that route. There you can see we just held down the spacebar to skip through dialogue with this character. At one point, he presents us with a choice for different items that he can give to us. But it just so happens to be the case that the item we want, a lockpick, is the first choice on that dialogue tree. So we get the item we need automatically just by holding spacebar. So that's convenient. Good. Next, we're going to set up what's called a glitchy save. Normally, you're not allowed to save the game during dialogues or cutscenes, but you can sort of break this rule by holding down the quick save button while a conversation is ending. If you then attempt to load that quick save, the game poops out some error message about not being able to find a camera. So we're about to see that here. So now our quick save is glitchy. If we attempt to load that save file later on in the game, it'll produce a variety of bugs that we're able to exploit. The really weird thing is that all save files made on this map are now also glitchy, even the one we made before triggering the glitchy save. I don't understand why it works that way, it just does. Deus Ex is a strange old game. A lot of things about it don't make any sense. Other useful thing to note is there's nothing special about the conversation with Manderley. We don't really care what conversation we're having to trigger the glitchy save. What does matter is that we want a glitchy save at the bottom of our list of save files. That just makes it easier for us to find that save file later on when we need it. Now that we've talked to all the required NPCs and set up our glitchy save, we just need to backtrack to the start of the mission in order to move on to the next mission. Going corner to corner here would be pretty inefficient, so instead we're going to be relying on the sounds of our footsteps to navigate. This is made easier by the fact that there are several different floor types on this level. Grass, clay, and then wood when we get back to the dock. Okay. Here at the dock there's another movement technique we're going to be using throughout the run, which is counting your character's footsteps. When I reach this wall, I'm going to count to 5 to line myself up with the boat. This is a useful technique when you don't have good corners or surface changes to work with, because the cadence of your footsteps will always be the same. In between levels, we often get an unskippable cutscene like this, where a boat or a helicopter is taking us from one area to the next. These are really nice in a blindfolded run because they're the only opportunity you have to relax and collect your thoughts. At all other times, your brain is firing on all cylinders. It's really nice to have a moment to catch your breath. This level is a good example of how there's often a mismatch between what the game tells us we're supposed to do and what we're actually required to do to make progress. We're told that we need to find a canister of plague vaccine and resolve a hostage situation in the subway. But we don't actually need to do either of those things to make progress. And in fact, we're going to do one better and blow up the hostages on purpose in order to make things more consistent. Blowing up the hostages is by far my favorite trick of the entire run. What we're going to be doing is navigating into the ventilation system around the subway station, and we're trying to look for a spot where we can line up a pistol shot on an explosive crate while standing in a position that we don't take any damage from the explosion. What makes this so difficult is whenever your character is crouched, you don't produce any noise. You can't hear your own footsteps. So this makes confined areas like ventilation systems very difficult to navigate. The totally absurd solution that I came up with for this problem was to sing the song Benny and the Jets in order to establish a tempo, and then use that tempo to line up the shot. We're going to see that here. Benny and the Jets. And just like that, all of the terrorists in the subway are dead without us having taken any damage. The fact that all the hostages died in the explosion is a sacrifice that we're willing to make. Here at the start of Hell's Kitchen, we're going to do something that might seem a little strange at first. We're going to turn our camera to face south so that we leave the subway station walking backwards. reason we do this is because the next object that we're going to interact with in the world is to the south of us. So rather than doing several smaller angle changes, we consolidate them into one large angle change. This is super important for the routing process because unlike navigating rooms where you can rely on muscle memory and sound cues, when it comes to angle changes, it's just raw memorization. There's nothing else to it. You either get it right or you don't, and when you don't, that can often kill a run. So as much as possible, we want to try to consolidate angle changes and minimize the number of them that we do. This section is difficult because there's just so much happening that it's hard to hear what's going on. There's allies and enemies running around, shooting each other, screaming in pain. It's basically impossible to isolate the sound of your own footsteps to navigate. On top of that, it's very random. We're trying to get to the room behind this bluish-gray door that we're going to see in just a moment here, in the upper right side of the screen. There's an enemy on the other side of this door whose behavior changes pretty dramatically. Sometimes he will run through the door and open it for us. Other times he'll hide inside. If we use a rocket to blow it open like we just did, sometimes he dies in the explosion, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he hides in one corner, sometimes he hides in a different corner. And in this particular run, we get a result that I've actually never seen before, where the enemy is alive, but he doesn't seem to notice us. It seems like his AI just gets stuck for some reason. And if we could find a way to replicate this result, it would be great, because he's not doing anything. But because I've never seen it before, it throws me off a little bit, and I have to kind of adapt on the fly to figure out what's happening. This building acts as a little convenience store, as it contains 3 items that we're going to be relying on pretty heavily throughout the rest of the run. First is the augmentation upgrade canister, which we just picked up, and in a moment we're going to pick up a biocell and a flamethrower, which, as you'll see later, is a ridiculously overpowered weapon.
Okay.
Now, because these items are right next to a loading zone, that enables us to do an item duplication glitch. We're going to load the glitchy save file that we set up near the beginning of the run. You'll see in a moment here we get an error message on screen. When we do this, the previous map is going to reset. So all the items are going to respawn, all the doors are going to lock themselves, and in this particular case, all of the enemies are going to unload. So by abusing this glitch, we can repeatedly run through this area over and over again to pick up multiple copies of the items that we need. Down. Shoot. No, this isn't going to work. Because that'll put it in the wrong slot. You can see here I get a little bit thrown off by the unusual behavior of the enemy that we were talking about earlier. What matters here is we want to pick up these items in a specific order so that they appear on our tool belt in a consistent order every time. By doing this, that enables us to use our muscle memory later on in the run to equip the items we need, rather than having to memorize where these items have appeared on our tool belt. But now that we've got everything in the order that we need them in, we can continue the cloning process to do a little bit more shopping and get more copies of everything that we need. While we're cloning items, this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about the hotkey setup. So I have the use key bound to numpad 9 on my keyboard. By binding use to a numpad button, this has the nice side effect of making it much easier to find keypads in the world. We just crawl along a wall, repeatedly spamming the use key until we hear the sound of our character pressing the number 9 in the game world. This tells us that we found the keypad and we're ready to input the code. Then, when we're ready to input the code, I have a special command bound to my page down key, which can toggle the hotkey script on and off. So when we turn it off, this allows us to use our numpad like a regular numpad, so we can input numbers rather than control our mouse cursor. Finally, I have another special command bound to the page up key, which produces a beep sound if the hotkey script is currently running. So this allows us to verify which of the two keyboard modes we're currently in.
Last trip. Down.
Now that we're done collecting items, we want to quickly verify that we have at least 2 biocells in our inventory, which we do. 2 is an important number because later on we're going to be doing another item duplication glitch. In order for that one to work, we need to have at least 2 copies of the thing that we're trying to duplicate. Then, once we're done verifying our biocell count, we can pass through the loading zone to resume the run. Passing through a loading zone is a big moment of relief, because anytime you pass through a loading zone, the game is guaranteed to set you to the exact same position and the exact same viewing angle every time, regardless of what you were doing before. So no matter how lost or confused or stressed you are, passing through a loading zone is a big checkpoint. It's a big moment of relief because you know you're guaranteed to be set up correctly for whatever you're about to do next. In this case, that task is picking up this explosive mine off of the wall, which we're going to be using later in the mission to blow up the final objective.
Clip clop, we're on the ladder. Ladder bug.
Here we have our first encounter with ladders. As you saw a moment ago, when we got to the top of the first ladder, instead of just stepping off of it, our character kind of vibrated up and down and got stuck. As any Deus Ex speedrunner will tell you, ladders in this game are notoriously finicky. Their behavior changes depending on your viewing angle, and the sound that your character makes climbing them changes depending on what you were doing right before you started climbing them. So it's really easy to get confused when you're working with ladders while blindfolded.
Let's save on the roof.
Now that we're up on the roof, we're going to abuse a fun little trick to get back down to the ground and skip some obstacles. If you quick save and quick load while falling, this resets your fall speed, which in theory allows you to avoid any amount of fall damage. I actually messed this trick up here and accidentally quick save right after landing, so I take a bunch of damage. But it's not a big deal because we're pretty close to the end of the mission, and as soon as the mission's over, we'll have an opportunity to restore ourselves to full health.
Corner. Flamethrower out.
Here we've come to the first combat section of the run, and it's time to show off the absolute absurdity that is the Deus Ex flamethrower. When you shoot an enemy with a flamethrower, they will instantly catch fire, stop attacking you, and just run around screaming until they die. The flamethrower has this huge area of effect, so all you have to do is stomp back and forth, spraying fire all over the place until all of the enemies in front of you are dead. We're also helped out by the fact that we're in a very narrow corridor, so we can dart back and forth left and right to dodge their attacks without worrying about going off course, because we know we're always going to stay within the bounds of this narrow corridor. amazingly,
Very
we managed to
nice.
get through this combat section first try, which is very rare, and I'm super happy about it.
Be one more dog, but it should be fine.
Down here in the basement of this building is another example of how good the sound design is in this game. As we pass underneath this red laser tripwire, we can hear the sound of the tripwire gradually shifting from left to right across our headphones. So that gives us a pretty good indication of when we've cleared the obstacle. So it's surprisingly straightforward to navigate this hallway even while blindfolded.
Nice.
In this room we have a small deviation from the visual speedrun route. Normally players would use an explosive to blow up this safe that's right in front of us, but the problem with that is doing so will make a lot of noise and attract a bunch of guards to our location. So instead, we're going to abuse this fun little lockpick trick, where if you start a lockpick animation and then open your inventory, the lockpick timer will continue to run in the background, which will allow you to use a single lockpick to open a door of any strength, even if it would normally take you 3 or 4 lockpicks to do that. The item we just picked up is super important. It's an upgrade that allows us to improve our running speed and jump height. To verify that we have it, we're going to quick save, throw the object, listen for the sound of it hitting the ground, and then quick load.
1, 2, 3. Quick save with a new angle. Good.
Now that we've confirmed that we have the upgrade canister, all we have left to do in this mission is throw this explosive mine to blow up a generator, and then escape onto the roof. Thankfully, there's a bunch of other exploding barrels in this basement, so we don't really need to be that precise about where we throw this mine. We just chuck it down this hallway and then scamper for the rooftop.
Quick save. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good job, JC. The power just died at the NSF headquarters. Now it's up to Paul. Go to the roof. A chopper is arriving with Agent Herman on board. He will lock down the warehouse while you take the chopper back to HQ.
Good. Very smooth so far. 2, 3, up. Good. Quick save.
We've arrived at the final boss of the mission, which is a ladder. In addition to the usual fiddliness of ladders in this game, this section is made a little extra tricky because right after the ladder is a gap in the floor that you can fall through. So there's a lot of little ways that this can fail, even though it looks super, super simple.
go. Cool. So we're going to UNACO 2, which is lockpicks and augmentation.
So we've made it home for our second visit to UNACO headquarters. Now, since we end up visiting UNACO so many times over the course of the game, during a run I find it really helpful to articulate out loud what we need to do on each visit, just to sort of refresh our memory and make sure we're focusing on the right things. In this particular visit, we need to visit the medical area to install an augmentation and heal up to full health. We need to visit Manderley to get our objectives for the next mission, and we need to pick up 2 lockpicks. It doesn't matter what order we do these things in, so it's just a matter of finding a route that feels intuitive for us. Although the layout of UNACO never changes, there are subtle differences in each visit that you would probably never notice in a visual playthrough, but become really important in a blindfolded playthrough. This room right here, our footsteps produce a different sound between the first time we visit and the second time we visit. And the door that goes directly into Manderley's office also has a different sound effect. On our first visit, when you open it, you can hear a swinging sound. On our second visit, it's totally silent. So when you're learning this game blindfolded, those 2 details can be really confusing during the practice process until you memorize which visits to UNACO have these quirks. Here in the medical area, we run into a small bit of randomness, which is the movement pattern of this little white medical robot. Thankfully for us, he happened to patrol into a position that's really easy to find, right next to this garbage can, although that doesn't always happen. We need to talk to this robot in order to install the leg augmentation that we picked up at the end of the previous mission. This interface is a good example of what we were talking about at the beginning of the run, where the game actually requires you to use the mouse in order to install this augmentation. There's no keyboard shortcut to select it. So for the blindfolded run, you just have to memorize a pattern of inputs in order to navigate your cursor over the thing that you need to click on.
Upgrade. Boom.
There we just use the augmentation upgrade canisters that we picked up in the little convenience store, the part of the mission where we were repeatedly passing through the loading zone in order to duplicate items. This allows us to upgrade our leg augmentation to maximum power, which normally wouldn't be possible for several more missions, but by using that loading zone trick, we're able to get maximum running speed right at the very beginning of the game. At the top of this stairwell, you're going to see I briefly get stuck in the corner between the wall and the little black sign that says level 2, this one right here. So I quickly flick to the left and then back to the right again to get around it. This is a level design pattern and a movement pattern that you're going to see over and over and over again throughout the run. There are hundreds of moments like this where you're moving along a smooth surface and then something juts out just enough to stop your progress. So eventually it just becomes muscle memory to dart back and forth to get around these obstacles.
Quick save.
Hope this one turns out a little better. I'd like to know what the feds are doing down in the South Block. You may use the helicopter, Mr.
Okay. Quick save.
Here at this little storage area outside the base, we grab our second lockpick, and just like we did with our augmentation canister, we can verify that we have it in our inventory by quick saving, throwing the object, and listening for the sound of it hitting the ground. Now that we know we have 2 lockpicks, we're ready to move on to the next mission.
Nice. Okay, next up is mole people. We begin by cloning.
Typically at the start of each mission, I like to save the game right away in case something goes wrong. However, we can't save while there's an info link message on screen. So, since we're waiting anyway, now's a good time to duplicate some items. This is a super simple trick. You just bind the use key to either mouse scroll wheel up or scroll down. Look at the item you want to duplicate, flick your finger over the scroll wheel really quickly to spam the use input. If you do this correctly, you'll end up with lots of copies of the item in your inventory.
What do I have?
Again, this only works if you have at least 2 copies of the item to start with, at least one in your inventory, and at least one out in the world.
Good.
Now that we're done cloning items, we're ready to start the mission. This is the first mission where we get to show off our shiny new leg upgrade, which, as you can see right there, dramatically increases our jump height and our running speed. So as much as possible for the rest of the game, we're pretty much always going to have our leg upgrade on whenever we're moving, except for rooms like this where we need to count a specific number of footsteps, and it's easier to set it up when we're moving slowly. Fun little quirk about this secret phone booth elevator thing. You'll notice after we input the code, we leave the elevator before it starts rotating. The reason we do this is because when you're standing on a rotating surface, the game is not consistent about what camera angle it's going to set you to. It's not a problem in a visual speedrun because you can just turn the camera to face the direction you want to go, but in a blindfold speedrun, it is a huge pain in the butt. Not knowing what angle you're facing is an absolute run killer, and we want to avoid it whenever possible.
After the quakes, the homeless drifted down here. Junkies, runaways, grifters. There's a DSS file a mile long on this place. Some of them, the so-called mole people, have permanent living quarters in an adjacent tunnel system on my map.
This segment here is a really interesting puzzle. At the south end of the tunnel, there is a secret room with a terrorist leader inside who's guarding a key that we need for the next area. If we can get to that room without having alerted any of the guards, the leader will surrender and tell his guards to surrender as well, which is super convenient for us. So we use a series of counting footsteps, moving at different angles, and listening for audio cues to sneak past the guards without them noticing us. That way we don't take any damage throughout this whole segment.
Hi, guy. Where are you?
Here, the game finds a brand new way of trolling me. Normally, when you get to within a certain radius of the terrorist leader, that's what triggers the dialogue with him that causes him to surrender. And normally, this happens as soon as you enter this room. This time, for whatever reason, it just didn't trigger at all, and I don't know why. So rather than wandering around blindly trying to figure it out, I just reload the previous quick save and try it again. Now that we've gotten the terrorist leader to surrender, Our next task is to pick up this blue nano key off the table, which we're going to do by setting our camera to a specific angle and sliding along the wall while spamming the use key. This has probably the biggest disparity between how easy something is to do when you're playing visually and how difficult it is to do it blindfolded. The big problem is you have no information to work with. There's no sound effect when you're looking at the key, there's no sound effect when you pick up the key, and there's no way of verifying if you have it in your inventory. The only way to find out if you've completed the task successfully is to go to the door that the key unlocks and try to open it. That could take several minutes, and that's a lot of time to lose if you fail the task. So you really need a rock-solid setup that works every time in order to get through this. Here, on our way to the door that we're trying to unlock, the game finds another brand new way of trolling us. Normally we're able to jump over this wooden platform thing with no problems, but this time, for reasons that are a total mystery to me, the jump key just isn't doing anything. I've never seen this happen in practice. Reviewing the footage now, I still have no idea why this is happening, so it totally throws me off during the run, and it takes a while before I'm able to mentally recover from it.
The panel's secured. Good. Booby traps. They really think
So confused.
I surrender.
So weird.
Easy, man. I won't get in your way.
Okay. Well, I don't know what the hell just happened, but didn't do anything, so.
Coming up is a crazy set of coincidences that works out in our favor. All the way back at the beginning of the game, during character creation, we deviated from the visual speedrun route by putting skill points into lockpicking instead of swimming. However, that decision ends up not mattering because on the far side of this door that we're about to open is our first opportunity to use the swimming skill, and it just so happens that between the start of the game and now, we've earned just barely enough skill points to upgrade our swimming skill twice. On top of that, when we open the skill menu, the swimming skill is selected by default, so we don't waste any time or energy by upgrading it right now. It's kind of crazy that it works out that way, and it was a really fun surprise when we got to this point during the routing process.
So it looks like the corner.
Navigating while swimming is pretty challenging at first because, unlike your footsteps on dry land, the splashing sound that you make while swimming doesn't change depending on what you're doing. It plays constantly regardless of whether you're moving or standing still, regardless of whether you're touching a wall or not. However, although the splashing sound doesn't change, the ambient background noise does change depending on your environment.
Good.
It's pretty subtle, but if you learn to listen for it, you can tell the difference between when you're swimming in a pool versus when you're swimming in a tunnel. And you can use these subtle changes in the soundscape to help guide your progress as you swim underwater. Here, there's a fun little timing trick we can use to get past these robots. If we start moving at roughly the same time as the one closest to us, his body will block the view of the robot farthest from us. That will allow us to sneak past both of them without taking any damage. It's slower than just running past them,
Okay.
but it guarantees that we won't take any damage. And in a blindfold speedrun, we place a pretty high value on not taking damage, because if we take too much damage to our legs, that will reduce our movement speed and eventually prevent us from jumping altogether. So that will throw off our timing for the tricks that we do later in the mission. In a visual speedrun, it's not a big deal, but in a blindfold speedrun, we can't tell what part of our body is taking damage, so rather than risk it, we would rather just not take damage at all whenever we can avoid it. This secret room we're about to enter is a bit of a detour from the main objective of the mission, but it's worth coming in here because this is our first opportunity to pick up a weapon called the Law, the light anti-tank weapon, which, thankfully for us, has a massive hitbox, so it's really easy to find within this room. We're going to be using the Law over and over again for a bunch of tricks later in the run, because it's super powerful and super buggy. Conveniently for us, there's also a lamb, one of those little explosive red mines in this room. We need at least 4 of these to complete some tricks later in the run, so it's very convenient for us that both of these can be found within the same room. Coming up is the helicopter room, which is the section of the run that has had the most routing changes since I first started this project. There's a lot of things that make this difficult when playing blindfolded. There's a ton of background noise, there's a bunch of enemies moving around randomly, many of whom are too far away for us to reach with our flamethrower. Sometimes those enemies will open doors for us and sometimes they won't. And at the end of the room, there's a narrow hallway guarded by a turret that can very quickly chew through our health. Once we reach that turret, we need to aim for a teeny tiny little button on the wall in order to escape. This went through 4 or 5 completely different routes before I eventually settled on the one that I like, which we're going to see here. So the fact that we were able to get through this first try is a huge relief.
6, 2.
Here at the start of the hangar map is our first opportunity to make use of a bug called the super jump. If you turn on leg power and then open and close the game options menu, this reapplies the jump height buff. No idea why it does that, but it does. It's super convenient for us. You can repeat this bug any number of times to get any amount of jump height. So we use this to get over the building directly in front of us, and then we get to use it again in conjunction with another bug. To get into the hangar, we're supposed to pass through this tunnel that's directly above us and behind us right now. However, the load zone trigger extends slightly outside the tunnel. So by lining up a precise jump, we can jump directly into the loading zone trigger from the outside.
Relax, G.
You were
Here inside the plane, we have our first opportunity to abuse the Law, this green rocket launcher. Normally, this is a consumable item that will disappear after we use it. However, if you pass through a loading zone immediately after firing it, this will skip the animation of it being put away and allow you to reuse it over and over again. Here, we're using it to kill a rival Pokemon trainer, Anna Navarra, so that we can skip a much more challenging encounter with her later in the game.
Save facing that.
The weird thing is that even after killing her, the game won't really recognize that she's dead until you trigger this dialogue sequence, which is why we make our way into the plane and then back out again.
Oh my god. Manderley will have you shot. We have to erase the log files. I'll protect you this time.
From here, all we have to do is some backtracking to get back to our helicopter and return to base. Right there, I walked into the houseplant in the corner of the room in order to verify my position. Unlike NPCs, which patrol around the room randomly, movable objects always spawn in exactly the same location, and they produce a really distinct sound effect when you bump into them. So they're a super useful way of verifying your position in the game world.
Damn it.
There I made a small mistake by falling off the building with too much speed, so I ended up falling in the helicopter blades and being chopped up into little piles of meat. Thankfully I made a quick save so it doesn't lose a lot of time.
It's true.
Cool. Okay, next is UNATCO 3. We need chocolate bars and Carter.
Here's the third visit to UNATCO. We have a few different tasks we need to complete. We need to talk to Manderley to get our objectives for the next mission, which we will immediately ignore. We need to stock up on candy bars, which won't make sense at first, but will make sense eventually. And we need to talk to the quartermaster to get ourselves some rockets. Again, like the previous encounter, it doesn't really matter what order we do these things in, so we just navigate in a way that feels intuitive.
I guess he. Here, I have some.
To stock up on candy bars, we can visit the break room over here, which has a vending machine. This vending machine is available to us in every visit to UNATCO, but this visit is particularly convenient because there's a pair of NPCs talking right next to the vending machine. They form a little corner that we can wedge ourselves into, which makes it easier for us to line ourselves up.
It's always
Okay.
100%.
Quick save.
I like to stay prepared.
That's probably it right there. Free radicals. You should charge your systems only when they've been significantly drained.
The reason I fire my pistol here has nothing to do with gameplay. It's actually a hardware issue. If I leave my mouse alone for too long without using it, it puts itself to sleep and the scroll wheel stops working. So we can turn it back on just by clicking the left mouse button, and we pull out the pistol before we do that, just so we can verify that we've actually turned it on successfully. Next, we're visiting the quartermaster to pick up some extra rockets. This is a deviation from the visual speedrun route, which gets rockets in other parts of the game. Those tend to be faster, but the problem is there's no easy way of verifying how many rockets you have in your inventory. But here, by listening to the dialogue, we can easily confirm that we've received the rockets that we need. Slightly confusing thing is the way the dialogue is worded, it sounds like he's giving us one rocket, but he's actually giving us a box of 4 rockets. So that was a big head scratcher during the routing process.
No plans. I'll take it. Cool. So we're in the right place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That dialogue that we just skipped tells us that although we've been given orders to go to Hong Kong, our helicopter pilot is going to bring us to New York City instead to rescue our brother. This upcoming mission is the last mission that even vaguely resembles casual gameplay before the speedrun route just goes completely off the rails.
Is this
Here we've got a small deviation from the visual route. The reason we just talked to our brother inside the apartment was that conversation is a trigger that removes a barricade we're about to pass through on the left here. In the visual route, players have found a way to jump over this barrier using a very precise jump, but I was never able to find a way to make that work while blindfolded. So if you're looking for a way to improve on this route, a natural place to start would be to try to find a way to replicate that jump so you can skip the dialogue with Paul. Here at NSF headquarters, we get to put together a few different tricks that we've seen earlier in the run. We're going to fire our law and then pass through a loading zone in order to keep it in our inventory. This law is going to blow up a door to save some time later. We're going to activate a super jump in order to get up to the top of this building. Then once we're up there, while we're waiting for this dialogue to finish, we're going to take this time to clone some items.
Computers up there, you'll need the instructions and account information Lebedev sent me. One of our agents who tried to send the signal but got run off left the data cube in a secret area below the garage. Look for a hatch under some boxes. A computer on the 3rd floor can unlock the hatch.
License. Quick save. See how many we have. Plenty. 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 Cool. Okay. Here we've got an opportunity to stock up on lambs, the little red proximity mines. We need at least 4 to use for tricks later in the game, so we're going to abuse our scroll wheel trick to pick up a bunch of these. Now, an important detail here is that because a lamb is a weapon, the game behaves differently when we drop it compared to something like a biocell or a lockpick. When we drop a lamb, we drop the entire stack of them from our inventory rather than one at a time. This means we can't easily clone them after initially picking them up, and we can't verify how many we have by dropping them one at a time. So to get around this, we verify how many we have by firing them as a weapon. And we do that off the side of the building, that way there's no chance that we're going to get hurt by the explosion. Okay, I got more than enough. Cool. This is the first time in the run where we interact with the computer, so we have to manually type in the username and password in order to get access. Going into this project, I figured that this would be pretty easy because most adults are comfortable typing without looking at the keyboard. However, this is surprisingly difficult. I really had no idea how much I was relying on peripheral vision to position my hands correctly, and instantaneous visual feedback whenever I make a mistake while typing. When you're blindfolded, you get neither of those things. So if you make a mistake, you have no idea what's going wrong. That particular computer we were able to get through fairly smoothly, but later in the run there are a lot of typing mistakes, and it is super frustrating.
Stand where I can see you.
I saw your mother last night. Now that we're done using the computer to upvote our own comments on Reddit or whatever, our next objective is to go back to the apartment to talk to Paul again. When that happens, a bunch of stuff is going to happen really quickly that if you've never watched a Deus Ex speedrun before, it's not going to make any sense. So let's take the time to set it up so that it will make at least a little bit of sense. After talking to Paul the second time, the game goes into a state where the next time you die, the game prevents you from dying and instead transfers you to a prison cell because you're being captured by your enemies. We can expedite that process by killing ourselves. So you're going to see here in a moment, right after we talk to Paul, we're going to fire a rocket at the ceiling to kill ourselves as quickly as possible. When that happens, and we go to the Majestic 12 prison cell, the game normally runs a script that does two things. First, it restores our health to make sure that we aren't still dead, which is nice, and it removes all the items from our inventory. However, if we load the glitchy save that we set up earlier in the game right at the very beginning of the next level, before that script runs, the script gets canceled. So we go into this weird state where we have negative health and all of our inventory items. Something that should never happen during a casual playthrough. There, so we were successfully able to cancel the script that would normally take our inventory and reset our health. So it should be pretty obvious why we would want to keep our inventory items, but what might not be obvious is why would we want to be at negative health? The answer is an absolutely absurd glitch called Dead Man Walking. If you're at negative health and you consume a healing item that's not a med kit, so for example a candy bar, this puts you into Dead Man Walking mode, which as you can see by these guards walking around, Dead Man Walking completely shuts off enemy combat AI. You can walk right past them or even hit them with a weapon and they won't do anything. This is the sole reason why I decided to do Deus Ex Blindfolded over any other game. Because for the rest of the game, no matter how difficult a combat encounter might normally be, we can get through it completely unscathed just by abusing this one bug. However, there are a lot of trade-offs to consider here. While we're in Dead Man Walking mode, we can't pick up most items in the world, although there are some minor exceptions to that. We also can't initiate conversations or cutscenes because when the cutscene ends, our camera will freak out and we won't be able to move. Thankfully for us, Dead Man Walking mode doesn't last forever. It only lasts until the next time you load something, either by passing through a loading zone or manually loading a saved game. So for the rest of the game, the routing process becomes a puzzle of deliberately turning Dead Man Walking mode on and off. Turning it on when we need to get past enemies, and turning it off when we need to interact with specific things in the world. Finally, the last trade-off is because we're at negative health, we become very fragile. Taking a single point of damage from any source will instantly kill us. Here we need to visit Alex Jacobson's office. When we talk to Alex, if we've killed Anna Navarra, which we did earlier in the game, he'll give us a key that allows us to escape the facility. The puzzle is how to find him. He patrols around the room randomly, and unlike the randomly moving medbot that we chased down earlier, Alex doesn't emit any sound when he's standing still. So, we equip our rocket launcher, which will make a beeping sound when it's locked onto a valid target. Conveniently for us, the rocket makes this beeping sound regardless of whether we're aimed at an enemy or an ally, so we can use it to locate Alex in the room. With the key in hand, all we have to do is leave the building and talk to our helicopter pilot to move on to the next mission. Nice. We're about to see a small deviation between the blindfold route and the visual route.
Here, we're relying on the key that we got from Alex Jacobson to unlock the front door. He was only willing to give us the key because we triggered a particular line of dialogue after brutally murdering Anna Navarro with a rocket launcher on the previous mission. In the visual speedrun route, if you don't confirm Anna Navarro is dead, she will appear there next to the locked door for a final showdown with you. And visual speedrunners are able to manipulate her AI into opening the door for you. That means you never have to kill her and you never have to talk to Alex Jacobson to get the key. There probably is a way to incorporate that into the blindfold route, but I was never able to figure it out for myself.
Okay.
And just like that, we're off to Hong Kong, which is a lot of players' favorite level, myself included. It's really fun to play through it casually, great soundscape, lots of memorable characters, and honestly even more fun to play it in a blindfolded speedrun because you get to do so many cool tricks. But before we can get to Hong Kong proper, we need to escape this hangar building, where the main obstacle is a set of blast doors at the south end of the facility. The visual speedrun route is able to skip through this entire section by using a trick called a bomb clip. Unfortunately, the bomb clip isn't viable for a blindfold route, so we need to go more or less the intended way. Although after we open the door, there is one fun trick up our sleeves to save time. Here we're using the same trick that we saw earlier, of opening the inventory screen while using a lockpick in order to increase its duration. The reason we care about this locker in particular is because it contains a nano key that we need. And thankfully for us, the nano key happens to be positioned in part of the locker that makes it very easy to pick up while blindfolded. It's exactly at the right height for us to see while we're crouched, without having to do a bunch of crazy angle changes.
Okay, save here. Down.
Now that we've pressed this magical button, our helicopter pilot is going to fire a missile at the blast doors to open them for us. The small problem here is that when the blast doors open, the game will spawn in an electrical hazard, which, remember, because we have negative health, if we take a single point of damage from this hazard, we'll die instantly. However, as you can see here, you can just walk right through it.
No fucking way. First try? Are you kidding me?
I don't know why this works, but if you get here quickly enough, although it looks like the electrical hazard has spawned, it doesn't actually start dealing damage for several seconds until after it's been spawned. So if your timing is good, you could just walk right through it, which is really convenient. After passing through the imaginary lightning, we come to an absolute gauntlet of memorization. We have to interact with 4 elevators like the one that we just left. All 4 of these elevators require you to press a teeny tiny button to get in, another teeny tiny button to use the elevator, and then a third teeny tiny button to leave the elevator. Every one of these button presses requires you to memorize and execute a very precise set of angle changes because the buttons are so small. On top of that, 3 of the 4 elevators, like this one, have a keypad where you have to memorize the numbers to get in. So all in all,
This is an absolute big, beastly, hairy boss monster that points at your ability to memorize numbers and says, "Show me what you got." There's no alternative, there's no way of sneaking around, there's no muscle memory, you just have to memorize it all.
Nice.
The one saving grace that makes this gauntlet at least a little forgiving is the control panel is positioned at the same height within all three elevators. So the number of angle changes you need to move up or down to find the buttons is consistent.
Good. Good.
The ROM encoding should be in this wing of the laboratory.
If you've played through Deus Ex casually, you've probably noticed that we're doing things completely out of order here. We're already making our way towards VersaLife Level 2 laboratories, even though we haven't even talked to Tracer Tong yet, who's the character that would normally give us the objective to go here in the first place. The reason we're able to do this is because of the way the game handles passwords. All of the keypads and computers that you need a password to use, like the one we're about to talk to right here, all these passwords are hard-coded into the game. They don't change from run to run. So if you, the human in real life, have the password memorized, you can use it before your game character is made aware of it. This allows you to skip the conversation or quest or whatever that would normally give you access to these codes. And the reason we would want to play this level out of order is simply because it's substantially faster than the intended route.
Sure, what went wrong there?
There, I got a little bit off course, and rather than spend a bunch of time and mental energy trying to figure out what went wrong, I simply loaded my previous quick save and tried it again. And this is a good opportunity to talk about quick saving and quick loading. Quick saving is a super valuable tool not only for the practice process, but also when you're doing complete runs. However, quick saving is kind of a double-edged sword, because if you do it too often, the problem that can emerge is you start to forget where you were or what angle you were facing when you make each quick save. And this can contribute to you actually getting lost more often than if you weren't quick saving at all. So there's a couple solutions to this. You can either have a set of predetermined locations where you're going to quick save every time, regardless of whether you think you're going to need it or not. Or the more improvisational route is to just keep a running log in the back of your mind of where your previous quick save was. Either way, you need to have some kind of plan to prevent yourself from going crazy with your quick saves and then forgetting where they were.
Okay.
Here, we quick save and then quick load in order to turn off dead man walking. We need to do this because we're about to have a conversation with an NPC, Maggie Chow. We don't strictly need to talk to her, and we also don't need to kill her here, but doing so allows us to get access to a weapon called the Dragon's Tooth Sword earlier than we normally would, and this is a super useful tool for us. In order to make sure that we have enough space for it in our inventory, we throw away some items that we no longer need. Because believe it or not, even though we're less than halfway through the game, Maggie Chow is the last character that we're going to need to kill, so we don't need our flamethrower anymore. Inputting this code here will start a self-destruct sequence and kick off a really absurd set of coincidences. In order to escape, we need to fall through this hatch to the right of us and land on a ledge, like that. If we go too far to the left, we fall into a vat of acid that kills us. As we can see there, to the right of the ledge is a different pool of acid that also kills us. So during the routing process, it seems like it would be really challenging to land on that ledge correctly. But through sheer dumb luck, after inputting the code to start the self-destruct sequence, all you have to do is crouch and hold right, and you will automatically land on the ledge every time. I cannot describe how crazy that is. There's so many parts of this game where the solution for the blindfolded run is way more convoluted, but there it's literally just press one button and wait for a while. Such a relief to know that a section that I was dreading turned out to be so easy.
Perfect.
Tracking down this dial connection. Illuminati fingerprints all over the stacks. I'm talking about the molecule shape. 17 segments, 23 coupling points. Only Illuminati technicians use sleeve bearings with 34-fold and 46-fold symmetry. Multiples of 17 and 23.
Let's do a hard save here, since we screwed up a bunch during the first.
Here we can see the utility of getting the Dragon's Tooth Sword early. As a melee weapon, we can use it to hit different surfaces, and we can tell what type of surface we've struck based on the sound. And because it's a really strong melee weapon, we can use it to destroy certain obstacles, like this boat. This part is very fiddly because the individual pieces of wood that appear when we destroy the boat are actually objects that our character model can collide with. So as they get strewn about in the water randomly, it can affect the way that we move, making it harder to get up onto this dock.
Okay.
Not advisable for tourists to visit the canals at night.
Our next objective is to visit Maggie Chow's apartment. Even though we just murdered her, and we already have the Dragon's Tooth Sword, we need to hit a specific trigger in her apartment, because if we don't, the storyline won't progress and we won't be allowed to leave Hong Kong. Thankfully, we can get up to her apartment really easily without having to endure yet another elevator ride by abusing a series of super jumps.
Wait a second for this to go away. Quick save. Eat the thing.
This section takes a couple tries because the sound of the alarm going off is super loud. It makes it difficult to isolate the sound of your own footsteps. The funny thing is, looking at this footage after the fact, there's a pretty obvious improvement that I didn't think of at the time, which is you can use quick saving and quick loading to sneak past laser tripwires without setting them off, which means you can get through this area without ever having to hear the sound of the alarm. I think if I ever try this again, or if anyone else wants to try to beat the record, that's a really natural way of improving this section.
This thing shapes like a mother.
Good.
Greetings, JC Denham. I have been observing you through this fascinating device in your skull. You have found
Cool.
the proof we needed. The dragon's tooth sword.
A little mixed up there, but I think we're fine.
This case. If you wish to be my ally, you will retrieve the sword and await my instructions.
This part is pretty difficult to watch. We are right next to the thing that we're trying to interact with, this little keypad, but our position is slightly off, so when we perform our angle change to try to interact with it, it doesn't work. But there's no way of us knowing why it's not working, so we end up having to try again.
Greetings, JC Denham. I have been observing you through this fascinating device in your skull. You have found the proof we needed. The dragon's tooth sword. There, inside the glass case. If you wish to be my ally, you will retrieve the sword and await my instructions.
Okay, back on track. Finally, after lots of stumbling around and resetting, we're able to open this glass case, which contains the original Dragon's Tooth sword. This is the trigger that we need to hit in order to progress the storyline. This section honestly isn't that hard. It typically doesn't take that long to get through it in practice, but it just goes to show how fragile this run is, where even a small mistake can be a big setback. Very good. Good recovery. Our next objective is to bring the Dragon's Tooth sword to a character named Max Chen. Normally, you would visit him in the Lucky Money Club, which we're about to pass by on the left here, although getting all the way to his headquarters is pretty far out of the way. Thankfully, there's a second copy of Max Chen on a nearby rooftop, so we're just going to activate a big super jump and go talk to him real quick. I don't really know why there's a second copy of him up here. Maybe he was put there for testing dialogue during development and then they just forgot to remove him. Or maybe it has something to do with the fact that later on in this mission, there's a cutscene within this map that includes Max Chen, so they need to have a copy of him nearby. I really don't know, but for whatever reason, he's there and we're happy to abuse that fact. Finally, we're in the home stretch of the Hong Kong segment. Everything that we've done so far, visiting VersaLife, blowing up Universal Constructor, going to Maggie Chow's apartment, talking to Max Chen, all of those steps are necessary just to set up one specific piece of dialogue with Tracer Tong, because that dialogue is what causes our helicopter pilot to appear and then allow us to move on to the next mission. And note that this is a pretty outdated speedrun route. In the modern visual route, players are able to skip even more of those steps by abusing a bomb clip. But again, so far as I can tell, that bomb clip doesn't seem to be viable for blindfolded speedruns, so we have to take a slightly slower route. After opening this door, we need to talk to Tracer Tong here in a very particular way. Because we've done so much of this mission out of order, the game is in kind of a weird state where there are two different sets of dialogue that can trigger when we talk to him. The one that we want, we activate by pressing the use key. The one that we don't want will trigger if we get too close to him. So we slide along the wall, spamming the use key in order to force the dialogue that we need in order to finish the mission.
Okay, next is Superfreighter. Our next cloning, we back on the top, waiting for Jock.
There during the cutscene, you heard me talking about when is the next time I'm going to clone items. One of the ways that a run can die is if you run out of consumable items, like lockpicks or candy bars. I don't have any backup strats prepared for this. So, because there's no way to recover from this kind of mistake, the best thing you can do is to try to prevent it. And a really easy way to prevent it is just to repeatedly tell yourself out loud when you need to clone things so you can't possibly forget. Here we need to talk to an NPC named Harvey Philbin because he's my pal. In order to talk to him, I rotate the camera 5 units to the right and 5 units down. And this is a good time to talk about one of the subtleties of angle changes. In the previous mission, Hong Kong, we talked about how whenever you want to interact with something really small, like an elevator button, you need to execute a very precise set of angle changes in order to find it. But that's not true for everything in the game. Some objects, like NPCs, computers, and Jock's helicopter, have very large, forgiving hitboxes, which gives you the flexibility to choose between a pretty wide range of angle changes in order to find that object. So, what's the best way to make use of this flexibility? For me personally, what made sense is to group these interactions together into little clusters and try to find a number that would work for every one of those interactions within the cluster. So, what do I mean by that? When I talked to Harvey Philbin, I looked 5 right and then 5 down. Then, when I talked to Stanton Dowd, I looked 5 right. So, all of the angle changes in this level are 5. This dramatically reduces the total amount of stuff that I need to memorize in the route. I can just break things down into little clusters and then memorize one number for each cluster. Here, I make a pretty dumb mistake. I'm just sitting in the dialogue screen for several seconds doing nothing. The reason this happens is whenever you talk to Jock to end the level, sometimes he'll say something like, "Let's go," and then the level ends immediately. Other times, he'll say, "Let's go," and then it triggers a dialogue sequence where you can confirm if you want to leave or not. There's not really any pattern to when those two things happen, so I just totally forgot and sat there waiting for no reason. In any case, we've arrived at the Superfreighter level. This level is the reason why we've been hoarding explosives all game.
We need at least 5 explosives here in order to blow up the Superfreighter, and another explosive in the level immediately after this in order to leave the cemetery. Right off the bat, we see a deviation from the visual speedrun, which enters and leaves the facility through a ventilation system in the roof. That ventilation system is definitely faster than going through this little corridor checkpoint thing. The problem is that the ventilation system is guarded by spider bots, which, for reasons that are a total mystery to me, are one of the few enemy types in the game that are unaffected by the dead man walking glitch. Even when you activate your magical candy bar, they can still chase after you and kill you. So that makes the ventilation system really inconsistent and really frustrating to play through. There are also some unique challenges if you try to leave through the ventilation system, which we'll talk about when we get there.
A little sloppy, that's fine.
Getting inside the Superfreighter is a task that's pretty easy to do visually, but surprisingly difficult to do blindfolded. We need to get to a door that's sitting at the top of a narrow L-shaped ramp. And the fundamental problem is, unlike the vast majority of ramps and staircases in this game, this one doesn't have guardrails. So there's no way that we can just hug the wall and slide up the ramp, because if we do, we'll just fall off. So after a lot of experimentation, the solution I eventually came up with was to jump past the door and then drop down to it from above.
You know it's going to be a good day when you stomp on a sailor's head until he dies.
Right there, I had the distinct privilege of jumping on top of an enemy and stomping on his head until he died. Whether or not he survives is completely irrelevant, and has no bearing on the rest of the mission. But if you do manage to kill him this way, other enemies will react to his body in a way that just makes no sense. Right there we saw another sailor said, "Who are you?" when talking to a corpse. I don't know why this game is the way that it is, but I love it.
Boom, baby. Get inside of my stupid fucking body.
So, we've arrived at the lower decks of the ship that we need to blow up.
Quick save.
Something unusual about this area is it's one of 2 areas in the game, the other being Paris Catacombs, where the game provides you with a map, a little top-down diagram of the entire level. This is completely irrelevant for a visual speedrun, but it's super helpful for the routing process for the blindfold speedrun, because rather than just throwing yourself at the level over and over again like you normally would, you can use the diagram to figure out a route ahead of time that minimizes the number of angle changes you need to do. And that dramatically speeds up the routing process and makes it easier to remember after the fact. There we just blew up one of the 5 weld points using our rocket launcher. And note that the sound of the rocket explosion is going to be the same regardless of whether or not you hit your target. But thankfully, each time you blow up one of these targets, the game gives you skill points. And skill points are always accompanied by a very particular sound effect. So this provides you a really natural way of verifying when you've hit your target correctly. If you hear the skill sound, you know you've done it. If you don't hear the skill sound, you gotta quick load and try it again. Our next target is on the far side of this helicopter room. It's blocked from view, but if you execute a super jump and then throw a grenade on the way up, you can get your grenade to go right over the helicopter and land right next to the target.
Nice. Fucking love that trick. So goddamn fun.
How does electricity come off that thing like lightning?
Right now we're getting stuck on this little work light thing on the floor. And the weird thing is normally you can just walk right over it if you're coming from this direction.
I don't know why in this particular run the game is just deciding to troll me and making it impossible to get past it.
Was I really stuck on the goddamn mirror that whole time? Jesus Christ.
In hindsight, it seems super obvious the solution is just to take one step to the right so you can walk past it instead of trying to climb over it. But there are a lot of things that seem obvious in hindsight when you're watching a blindfolded run. In this room, after we blow up the third weld point, we're going to get some really misleading dialogue. Tracer Tong chimes in and tells us that we need to turn on the bilge pumps and then reverse the flow, and he gives us some instructions on how to do that. The weird thing is that the bilge pumps are on by default, so we can just skip that step. I don't really know why the game does this. In order to reverse the flow, we need to log into this computer here in the corner. The interesting thing is that this blue and green computer model is used dozens of times throughout the game, and most of them are placed at the same height above the floor. This means that we can use the same vertical angle change of looking down 5 units to interact with all of them. So this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the mission. Instead of treating objects in the game world as separate, distinct encounters, find ways of grouping them into clusters so you can reduce the total amount of information that you need to memorize. We've reached the room with the last 2 weld points. Note that in a casual run, the game gives you total freedom to pursue these objectives in any order you want. It doesn't matter which weld point you blow up first or last or whatever. However, when you complete all of the objectives, the ship starts falling apart, and as you can see in a moment here, the game world is going to start shaking really violently. This isn't just for show. Each time the game world shakes, it shoves your character a random direction and makes it much more difficult to navigate while blindfolded. Cool. With that in mind, we want to minimize the amount of time that we're navigating during the shaking process. In order to do that, the last thing we do is blow up the weld point that is closest to the exit. So as soon as we fire that last rocket, we can immediately leave. Speaking of the world shaking, this circles back to something else we were talking about at the start of the mission, which is a deviation between the blindfold route and the visual route. The visual route uses a ventilation system to get in and out of this facility. So on the way out, they simply activate a super jump, turn to the right, and then jump from the ship to the entrance to the ventilation system. And it's super easy to do visually. The problem, the reason why we don't do it blindfolded, is because each time the world shakes and it jostles your character around, that jostling can happen even while you're midair doing the super jump. So you can line up your jump perfectly to get to the exit, and while you're flying towards it, the game will just decide, nope, you don't get to do that. You're going to land in the water. And because the game shakes so often and so violently, it makes that jump way, way less consistent than it should be. So rather than deal with the headache of having to try that jump over and over again, we just go through this hallway on ground level for consistency.
Okay. So next is Cemetery.
The last map of the Superfreighter mission is the Cemetery, where we need to talk to Stanton Dowd again before we go to Paris. This level is super straightforward. It uses tricks we've already seen before. The one quirk is we're going to do things slightly out of order from the casual route. Normally, you would talk to Dowd first, and then blow up some sort of signal jammer thing. I don't really know what it is. We're going to do that the other way around, and blow the signal jammer up first, just because it's a little bit faster. Then, once we're inside this mausoleum, we're going to keep our rocket launcher out and use it to help find Stanton Dowd, because he's patrolling around the room randomly.
Okay, we should be in a corner.
How'd you get the gate?
JC, I'm coming in fast. LZ is hot, so get to me as soon as you can. I'm gonna be a sitting duck out here.
next we're going to Paris. We'll start by doing one cloning session. Start with hard save, gives you less of the cloning. We've arrived in Paris, which, side note, I personally really dislike the Paris levels. I think they're super tedious. But anyway, after we clone some items, the first big trick we're going to do is a super jump from this rooftop down to the entrance to the Catacombs. And this is a pretty precise jump to execute blindfolded. There's a lot of ways it can go wrong. You can activate too many super jumps or too few super jumps. You can slightly miscount the number of steps you're moving before you execute the jump. And so what I found to be a really effective practice strategy for a trick like this is to deliberately fail on purpose many, many times in slightly different ways, and then observe where those failures put you in the game world. So this has the dual benefit of making the trick more consistent, while also making it easier to make adjustments after each failure, so you know what you need to change in order to execute it correctly. End result of all that practice was we were able to execute this first try during the run, which is super satisfying.
At the foot of these steps is the entrance to the catacombs. Originally limestone quarries.
So the Paris Catacombs level is by far the most distinct in terms of what the practice process looked like and what it feels like to play through it blindfolded. Normally, whenever you're navigating a level that has a bunch of narrow corridors like this, the process is really straightforward. You just slide along a wall until you reach a corner, and then you slide along a different wall until you reach a different corner. And you just keep doing that over and over again. The core problem here that makes that impossible is scattered throughout the level are dozens and dozens of these burning barrels. When you touch a burning barrel, it deals a little bit of fire damage to you. And remember, because we're at negative health at this point, taking a single point of damage from any one of those barrels will instantly kill us. So, we have to find a way of navigating this level such that we never touch a single barrel. Thankfully, just like the Superfreighter level, the game provides you with a little top-down map of the entire level. So I went through and marked down the location of every burning barrel with a little red dot, along with other points of interest like keys, doors, and proximity mines. Then, looking at this barrel map, we can try to identify parts of the level where we can safely and efficiently navigate from one corner to another, and I've marked these down with green arrows. That's not possible for every section of the level due to the position of the barrels, so some of them require a little bit more practice, a little bit more trial and error, and we mark those down with blue arrows along with numbers telling us how many paces we need to count, so we're listening to our footsteps in order to navigate. So the end result of this mapping process is during a run, we can toggle back and forth between visualizing a first-person view of the game world and visualizing a top-down view of the map that we've made, depending on which is more helpful for whatever we're trying to accomplish.
Looks like a chance. Got a team of MJ-12 troopers, but use your head. We don't want the hostages getting caught in the crossfire. John's picking up heat signatures of what look like troops. The MJ-12 bunker must be nearby.
Fuck yes.
That right there was a pretty precise sequence of navigating by counting footsteps in order to dodge a bunch of barrels and get into that narrow crawl space. As soon as that infolink message started from Tracer Tong, it's a big relief because that verifies that we're on the right track. Here we need to grab a nano key off of this table in order to escape the Catacombs level. I find this key pretty hard to get, harder than any of the others in the game, which doesn't really make any sense because it's essentially the same setup. You just point your camera at a particular angle, slide along a wall while spamming the use key. But for whatever reason during practice, I found that I messed this one up more often than I actually got it. Here, thankfully, we get it first try,
but we won't know until we try to use the key later in the level.
Oops. A little slow. Fuck it.
We've arrived at the exit door. Hearing the sound effect of it opening is a big relief because it means we were successfully able to pick up the key earlier. Interesting side note is that in the visual speedrun, they don't pick up the key at all. They just clip through the door using a trick called a bomb clip, where essentially they just throw a proximity mine at a particular angle and it forces the character model through the door. And for a long time, I assumed that the bomb clip wouldn't be viable in a blindfold speedrun, specifically because each time you attempt a bomb clip, it sets you to a random facing angle, and random angle changes are the absolute nemesis of a blindfold speedrun. However, later in the game, in a different part of Paris, I was able to find a section where we actually can use the bomb clip, because there's a way of reorienting yourself after you get through the door you're trying to clip through. Sadly, it didn't occur to me at the time that you can use that same technique on the Catacombs door, so that's a pretty natural time save that unfortunately we didn't use in this run. I've just made a pretty big mistake here. I got a little bit mixed up while navigating the area just outside of the Catacombs, so instinctively I quick-loaded to try again. What I didn't realize was that it's actually been quite a while since my last quick save, so now I have to do the entire end section of the Catacombs all over again. I'm trying not to be too hard on myself because I've been concentrating for several hours at this point, so I'm starting to get pretty fatigued. I have a hunch that I'm on world record pace, although I don't really know for sure, but I'm starting to get pretty nervous about that. And honestly, I just really don't like the Paris levels. I find them really tedious to play through. So all of that is kind of a perfect storm that leads to this and the next few sections being pretty sloppy.
Just focus on executing.
This passage goes to the sewers. If you don't mind the sludge, you'll be able to get around the city without a metro pass. I just learned that Nicolette is often seen at Club La Porte de l'Enfer in the Champs-Élysées. Follow these tunnels to that part of Paris. It's our only lead. These sewers can take you anywhere in the Champs-Élysées where you will find the club. I just got an unexpected message from Jaime Reyes. He's at a cafe and wants to see you. He says it's urgent. The cafe address is number 19. Above, I'm showing MJ-12 troops and the Paris police. Also some bots. The police won't bother you, but stay away from the troopers. The government has restricted access to the metro. You'll have to get around on foot.
There we go.
You found the club, the only one to stay open during martial law. They've hiked up the cover, but you will have to pay if you want to find out.
This section loses a bunch of time for the same reason as the previous section. I'm just getting mixed up on where my quick saves are. Here, when I arrive at this locked door, I get an infolink message from Tracer Tong, and you're never allowed to make a save during an infolink message. So I open up my inventory to do the lockpicking trick and wait for the infolink message to finish. The tricky thing is that while you're in your inventory, the audio from the infolink message continues to play, but the game doesn't update the timer for how long the message has been on screen. So when I exited my inventory screen, it sounded like the audio was done and I was ready to make a quick save. But because the message was still on screen and hadn't finished yet, when I hit the quick save button, it didn't actually do anything. I get a little bit mixed up here, so I quick load to try the section again. And because of this mismatch, the game puts me in a different part of the level than where I think it's going to put me. And it takes me a while to figure out what my mistake was.
La Porte de l'Enfer. Resistant members aren't the only... La Porte de l'Enfer. Resistant members aren't the only ones fond of the discreet staff and plentiful shadows. Watch your back.
What's happening right now?
La Porte de l'Enfer. Resistant members aren't the only ones fond of the discreet staff and plentiful shadows. Watch your back.
So confused right now. What is happening?
La Porte de l'Enfer.
I thought I saved after this.
The only ones fond of the discreet staff and plentiful shadows. Watch your back.
Oh, that's right. That's fine. Okay. Yeah, it's fine. So saving in the corner, before the bar. See, here I finally figured out what's going wrong, and I make a point of waiting a little bit longer after closing my inventory before attempting a quick save. But it turns out I still didn't wait long enough, and so I still didn't actually make a quick save. So when I get mixed up in this section again, I try to quick load and it brings me to the wrong place again, which is super confusing and frustrating. Why am I getting stuck on this?
La Porte de l'Enfer. Resistant members aren't the only ones fond of the...
Stop asking me to do this.
La Porte de l'Enfer. Resistant members aren't the only ones fond of the discreet staff and plentiful shadows. Watch your back.
The time is still going. At this point in the run, we get a distraction that I wasn't really prepared for. If you listen in the background, you can hear a fire truck or something going by, and my dogs start howling so loud I can hear them through the headphones. Back corner.
Looking for Nick.
There we go. I can hear my dogs howling outside. Okay. finally we escape the clutches of the nightclub, which honestly is not that difficult. It's just hard to play at your best for 3 hours straight. But anyway, we got past it, so now all we need to do is talk to Nicolette Duclare and leave for the next section of Paris.
Okay. Super sloppy, but that's fine. You can reset here.
Here at Chateau Duclare, the route we take is pretty simple and pretty similar to the casual route. All we have to do is log into a particular computer to download some algorithm or whatever, and then leave out the back through the sewers. This is made a little bit easier by the fact that this house and the grounds surrounding it have a lot of different floor types, so it's pretty easy to navigate by listening to the sounds of your footsteps as they change on the different surfaces.
I'm pulling up the floor plan. An old summer home built during the Third Republic. It's been vacant since Miss Duclare's assassination. Hopefully these elegant rooms contain some clues about the Duclare family's involvement with the Illuminati. In France, the gentry keep their wine in a small cellar to preserve the flavor from heat and sunlight. An old bunker built during World War II by the British to hide Jewish families. The Duclares acquired the property after the Nazis sent it to a camp in Germany. Strange. I'm picking up heavy-duty fiber optic activity down here. Some kind of giant routing station.
Earlier in the run during the Betrayal mission, we talked about how difficult it can be to type while blindfolded, and this is the first computer terminal where we see a lot of typing mistakes. The problem here is that both the username and the password are pretty difficult to type. They feel awkward. B. Duclare doesn't really sound or look like a word, and the password contains an underscore, which is a fairly unusual character that in order to type it, you need to move your hand pretty far from its natural home position. So to try to make this easier, I spent a lot of time just sitting here, typing this username and password over and over and over again to try to get it into my muscle memory. And even with all that practice, I'm still making mistakes on it. Now that we're done using the computer to register to vote or whatever, we just need to backtrack through the dungeon and leave the house. After this message from Morgan Everett, it's important to let Nicolette catch up with us at some point to start a conversation, because that conversation gives us a key that we need in order to leave the level.
What is it?
A trans.
Here, yet again, for the third time in the Paris chapter, I've forgotten where my last quick save is, and so when I get slightly off course, I quick load to try again, not realizing how far back it's going to send me. So now I have to do the typing thing all over again.
So you found Beth's computer. We are easy. A trans.
There we go. Saved at the window. Here we're able to tell where we are based on the sound of our footsteps, which change when we move from the stone surface of the basement to the wooden surface of the dining room. There we go. That line of dialogue from Beth Duclare is a useful signpost because it tells us that we've reached the back door of the house. From here, we can just activate a super jump and our magical candy bar in order to jump over the labyrinth in the backyard and get past all the MJ-12 troopers. So we've arrived at the Knights Templar Cathedral level, and this is where things start to get really, really bad. This is by far the sloppiest section of the entire run. All we have to do here is navigate to the cathedral, log into a computer, and then use it to upload a cat meme or whatever. And normally this section would take maybe 2 minutes to finish if things are going smoothly. Here, it ends up taking 10 minutes, and it feels like an eternity. So many different things go wrong that I was honestly tempted to just yank off the blindfold and abandon the run. The route that I use for this section starts by executing a pretty precise super jump to get over the wall and go out of bounds, and then another super jump to go back inbound so we can get to the cathedral. Ideally, what we'd like to be able to do is one really big super jump to get from the starting location all the way to the cathedral. And if you look at the level geometry, it seems like that should be possible. The problem is that even though we're in an outdoor area, there's an invisible ceiling just above the top of these buildings. So if you try to crank up your super jump in the hope of getting a lot of extra height, it ends up not working. You just bonk your head on the ceiling and fall right back down to the ground. Here, I've executed the 2 super jumps correctly, so I immediately start moving forward to get to the cathedral. What I've forgotten is that after landing, I need to run 3 paces up and to the left before I start moving forwards. Otherwise, I'll just get stuck on this wall here. On this attempt, I mistime my jumps and end up on the right side of the circular building, which is something that's never happened in practice before, so I have no idea where I am at this point.
God, why is this place so fucking annoying?
Yes, obey your
Perfect.
masters. Come to me.
There we go.
Here we've made it to the door to the cathedral, which is a big moment of relief. But unfortunately, we're not out of the woods yet. Normally, after opening this door, I go to the upper right corner and make a quick save. You can see here that I forget to do that. And that's a mistake that will immediately bite me in the ass. And it marks the 4th time in a row in Paris that I've made a mistake related to my quick saves. After opening this door to the right of us, we need to activate super jump again in order to survive the fall to the floor below us. But you'll see in a moment here, when I attempt to set up the super jump, I do the wrong inputs and end up loading a previous save file instead. Then when I go to quick load, it brings me all the way back to the start of the cathedral section, which is super frustrating. This might seem like a really random mistake to make until you understand some of the subtleties of the super jump. In order to activate it, you hit the escape key, navigate down to the settings menu, and then navigate down to the game options menu, which seems really straightforward. The tricky thing here is that the number of keyboard inputs you do changes depending on what's happening in the game. Because remember, we're not allowed to save the game while a conversation is happening. So when we hit the escape key, sometimes we can select the save button and sometimes we can't. So that changes the number of inputs to get to the settings menu from 3 to 2, depending on the context. And we do both versions of that sequence so often that they both get ingrained into our muscle memory. So what happened earlier, the mistake that I made after getting into the cathedral, was that I just executed the wrong set of muscle memory inputs and ended up loading a previous save instead of going to the settings menu. Finally, note that this is a mistake that would only ever happen while playing blindfolded, because in the visual run, you have the luxury of using the mouse to select these options instead of the keyboard. On this attempt, I've ended up at the door to this little circular building, which isn't where I want to be, but this happened often enough in the practice process that I was able to develop a backup strat. So from here, we're able to get back on track. There we go.
MJ-12 has the Cathedral locked down. If you can't get through one of the doors, you'll have to find another way. I'm not sure where the computer system is located.
Okay, quick save at this corner. Here you can see an example of what we were talking about earlier. When I go to set up the super jump, the save game button is grayed out because we're currently receiving a message from Gunther Herman. You can also see how hesitant I am here because I really don't want to make the same mistake I made last time. Finally, we have arrived at the climactic showdown with Gunther Herman. This takes me a few tries to get right, but the basic idea is we're going to use the beeping sound on our rocket launcher to line up a shot with him, and then because we've put points into heavy weapons, a single rocket is enough to kill him in one hit. Note that we're not actually required to kill him in order to progress the story, but if we don't, he'll walk up to us, start a conversation, and then attack us afterwards. So killing him ahead of time makes this room more consistent. Random little piece of trivia here. This is the only computer in the whole game whose username and password consist entirely of numbers, which means it's the only computer that we can log into just by using our numpad. Now that we're done doing whatever it is that we were doing on the computer, we just need to navigate to a subway station to exit the level. We're going to do that mostly facing the wrong direction since we're currently looking north and the subway station is to the south of us. Technically it would be faster to turn around because you get a small movement speed boost when you're running forwards rather than backwards. However, at this point in the routing process, I've already memorized so much useless crap that I'll take any opportunity I have to minimize the number of angle changes. So, we do this backwards.
We're hearing the voice of a majestic 12 AI.
Good.
No need to be alarmed. For now, I can protect you from this one, Deus. Your systems were very cooperative. You are just a prototype, Denton. A prototype for me.
This subway station is a good example of what makes Paris feel so tedious to me. It just feels so empty. There's nothing to do here. We have to visit this area in order to talk to a particular NPC, but that NPC is positioned as far away from the entrance as possible. So we're just running through this area doing nothing for several minutes. There's no fun items we can find, or secrets, or cool conversations. There's no obstacles, there's no enemies. We're just moving through a space. And we're never going to visit this area again, so there's no way that we can develop a sense of nostalgia or emotional attachment like we can with Hell's Kitchen. So Yeah, really don't like this area.
Keep going. Batonway is in the tube below.
Only a couple of trains are running. You travel at your own risk tonight, monsieur.
Hit the plant. We're about to be transported to Morgan Everett's home, which is a level that we can skip almost all of by exploiting a bomb clip. This is the technique that I was talking about in the Catacombs level that allows us to essentially teleport through thin walls. Normally, this technique is problematic for a blindfold speedrun because each time you attempt it, the game sets you to a random facing angle. So if the next thing you need to do requires a precise angle, it's almost impossible to recover. But there are two things about this particular bomb clip that make it viable. First, we can reorient ourselves by using our keyring. We simply stand next to the door, repeatedly rotate our camera, and use our keyring until we hear the sound of the keyring touching the door. This is something you can only do on doors that have a key associated with them, otherwise nothing will happen. The other thing that makes this special is the next thing we need to interact with is Jock's helicopter, which, as you can see here, has a really large forgiving hitbox. So we don't need any precise movements or angle changes in order to escape the level. Good. Much smoother than last time. Next is gas station, right? This one. Next is Vandenberg, which is a pretty crazy level because there's actually two different tricks you can do to skip the entire level. For some reason, there's this invisible floating trigger thing that sits a few feet above the ground near the exit area, which conveniently for us, the exit is right next to the entrance. So we just wander on over there, line ourselves up with a particular corner, do a series of jumps, and we hit the trigger to end the level. The visual speedrun uses an even crazier version of this trick, where you can hit the exit trigger using the tracer rounds on an assault rifle. However, this is problematic for a blindfold speedrun because in order to control the recoil of the assault rifle, you either need to use the mouse, which is problematic for us, or you need to spend a bunch of skill points on the rifle skill. And at this point in the game, we don't have any skill points to spare. Next is the gas station level, where we've been sent to resolve a hostage situation. The good outcome is to rescue the hostage, but the fast outcome is to kill the hostage on purpose. The way we do that is to set up a pretty cool trick shot, where we set our camera to a particular angle, do a super jump, and then listen for a particular audio cue. When our helicopter pilot says the word Tiffany, we fire our rocket, and if we've executed it correctly, the explosion of the rocket will be close enough to the hostage that the guards get alerted and kill her. We do have to deal with a bit of randomness here. Sometimes when we're jumping in, the enemies will notice us right away and kill us. Other times they don't notice us at all, and we can sneak through the level unscathed. Unfortunately, we can't rely on dead man walking here, because if we turn on dead man walking mode, the enemy AI turns off and they never kill the hostage. So we just have to try over and over again until we get it. In this particular attempt, we made it to the exit area, but unfortunately the timing of the rocket shot was slightly off, so the guards never killed the hostage.
I'm gonna stay back until you have to. Touch down at the junkyard to the south. Try to make us stop.
Why does this sometimes work and sometimes not?
I'm gonna stay back until you have to.
That time we were able to execute it successfully. Personally, I love the irony of JC Denton saying, "I gave it my best shot," after we just executed that trick shot. Next is the OceanLab level, which I consider to be the final exam of the blindfold speedrun. This level really demands a comprehensive understanding of all of the different elements that we've talked about throughout the run. There are super jumps. You have to execute precise angle changes to hit small buttons. You have to memorize a ton of different codes and passwords. You have to navigate computer screens using keyboard shortcuts. There's swimming, there's ladders, you use the lock-picking trick. You do some exploits with the quick save button. And on top of all that familiar territory, this level also introduces some new level geometry that we haven't seen before. There's a bunch of corridors where the walls are slanted rather than at 90-degree angles. So this changes the way that our character moves when we attempt to slide along the wall. All in all, it's a really complex level. There's a lot to learn in order to get it right. And as you'll see throughout this level, we make a lot of mistakes because it's so difficult. That right there was our first encounter with one of those slanted walls we were just talking about. When you move into it, instead of it stopping your movement cleanly, you'll repeatedly slide off of the wall, and you can't jump while you're in that sliding animation. Thankfully we were able to get through it first try, but unfortunately we immediately mess up and get lost in this room, so we have to try this section again. Save on the roof of this thing. Get the fuck on. Jesus. Stop doing that. There we go. Fuck, why can I not move? You can tell by the mistakes in this section that fatigue, nerves, and frustration are all starting to build up here. Thankfully, we're able to reach this elevator, which we can tell because the sound of our footsteps are different here than any other part of this area.
URV bay is in this module. You might not hear from me again. Not sure if microwave transmission can reach the ocean anyway.
This is the first of several computer terminals we need to interact with. Up until this point in the game, the computers we've talked to have all been the big blue and green ones, which have really nice behavior. As soon as you log in, the button that you need to press to advance the story is highlighted by default, so you don't need to navigate any menus, you just hit the space bar. These little gray computer terminals are different. There's a bunch of different buttons you can press, and the one that you need is not highlighted by default. Thankfully, the game does provide some keyboard shortcuts to navigate these menus, so we don't have to rely on any mouse shenanigans. But that does mean that these little gray computers require more memorization than you need for the big green and blue computers. We need to talk to that last computer console for two reasons. First, to open the submarine bay door, which isn't relevant now, but later on when we revisit this area, that will allow us to leave the level. And the second was to deactivate a turret, which we won't actually see for several more minutes. The reason we care about deactivating turrets in this level, which we're about to do in just a moment here, is because turrets in OceanLab behave differently than any other turrets in the game. Normally, a turret is dormant until you either get spotted by a camera or you walk through a red tripwire. These turrets are a sort of chaotic advanced version where they'll start shooting you as soon as you enter the room. So, whenever possible, we'll use these computer terminals to turn them off. Right around this corner is another one of those chaotic turrets. Unfortunately, it's not linked to any computer terminal, so there's no way of turning it off. So instead, we blow it up. And the reason we need to blow it up instead of just running past it is because it's guarding a nano key on the floor that we need in order to get to the next area.
Okay. Quick save. 1, 2, 3. All the way down.
Throughout this section, you can hear me talking to myself occasionally, which is a useful technique for avoiding nerves, staying focused, and avoiding stupid mistakes. Unfortunately, I forget to say one of the most important things that you can say when you're talking to yourself. If there's a place in the level where you execute an angle change and you do a quick save, it's really important to remind yourself out loud which of those two things happened first. Did you quick save before or after the angle change? I forget to say that, and so when I mess up this section here and get a little bit lost, I quick load, but I can't remember which direction I'm facing. And the reason I can't remember is because I forgot to say it out loud. Here's where you can see me paying the price for my mistake earlier of forgetting to say the important thing out loud. I'm searching for the nano key again, but because I'm facing the wrong angle, I end up just walking right past it instead of picking it up. So I end up getting lost again. Thankfully, I'm able to figure out what the mistake was and correct for it. So after a few more tries, we're able to get through the rest of the level.
All the way down. Okay. Okay.
Good. Hearing that splashing sound is a big relief here, because as much as I hate swimming, this confirms that we've successfully navigated the Greasel Lab and we've moved on to the next section.
Okay.
This next room is guarded by an electrical hazard, and unlike the hazard at the beginning of the Hong Kong segment, this one actually does its job and will kill us when we touch it. Thankfully, there's a pretty cool trick that we can use to skip past it. We're going to open the exit door while standing outside the field, quick save, and then quick load while holding the forwards key. And you can see here we just cut right through it without taking any damage. I'm a little fuzzy on why this works. My very rough understanding is that if you quick load while holding a movement key, your movement gets applied before other stuff in the level loads, so you can use it to sneak past electrical hazards or laser trip wires. I think there's a way of using it to get more height at the top of a jump. I'm not really sure, so if you happen to understand how this trick works, feel free to leave a comment below.
Okay. Quick save.
This next hallway features some of the strange geometry that we talked about at the beginning of the OceanLab segment. Instead of vertical walls, this one has slanted walls, which when you move into them, you'll bounce off of them repeatedly like you'll see here. This makes the hallway quite a bit harder to navigate because the sound of your footsteps and your movement both become more erratic. And at the end of this hallway is another one of those chaotic turrets, which you'll notice isn't firing at us. The reason this turret isn't doing anything is because we turned it off way back at the beginning of the level. This is kind of a deviation from the normal Deus Ex design pattern. Usually, if there's a thing you can interact with, the computer you use to interact with it is somewhere nearby. It's very unusual for there to be such a wide distance between the two objects. Coming up after this elevator ride is kind of a strange encounter that I don't think we see anywhere else in the game. We're about to sneak past a gas grenade that's stuck to the wall, and then pass through a loading zone. Later in the level, we're going to pass through the same loading zone in the opposite direction. It's really important that when we pass through the first time, we don't set off the gas grenade, because if we do, no matter how quickly or how slowly we complete this part of the level, the gas clouds will still be there the second time we pass through the loading zone. It's just some quirk in the way the game calculates time. That matters for us because since we're at negative health, if we touch any of those gas clouds, they'll instantly kill us.
Quick save before the angle change. 1, 2, 3.
Here we need to execute a big super jump to skip past an elevator and get up to our primary objective, this computer right here. Thankfully for us, we got it first try, and the reason we know that we got it first try is because this room has a very distinct sound profile. It doesn't sound like any other room that we visited in the run.
12. Skywalker. Quick save after the computer.
Now that we've used the computer to convert a PDF into a JPEG or whatever, all we have to do is backtrack through the whole facility to leave. And coming up is one of my favorite interactions with an NPC in the entire game. As we're leaving, Bob Page chimes in and says, "Step over to the communicator, I have something to say." And we just don't do that. Fuck that guy in particular. We don't need to do what he tells us to do, so we're just gonna walk right past him.
Okay. Quick save in the corners of the elevator. 1, 2.
For us anyway. How ironic.
Oops, why did I do that?
All in all, you weren't a bad experiment. You'll be the last prototype we have to discard.
On the other side of this door is a confrontation with Walton Simons.
Quick save.
It's pretty easy to just run right past him, and that's what they do in the visual speed run. The problem is that when you get to the far side of this room, it takes a little bit of time to set up the trick that we use to skip past the electrical hazard, the same one that we saw earlier. And if Walton Simons happens to catch up with you while you're setting up the trick, it can really throw you off. So to avoid that inconsistency, we just talk to him on purpose as soon as we see him.
Nice.
And that's the trick I was just talking about, the same one we used earlier in the level. To sneak past that electrical hazard, we just do a quick load while holding the forward key.
Quick save before the angle change.
There you can hear me say, quick save before the angle change. So I'm trying to correct for the mistake that I made earlier in the level, where I got a little bit lost because I couldn't remember what angle I was facing after a quick save. And right there, I made a really stupid mistake. I forgot to turn on Dead Man Walking, so as soon as I entered the room with enemies in it, they just brutally murdered me. I struggle with this room for a little while, and it's one of the few parts of the run where I'm making a visualization mistake rather than an execution mistake. In my head, the room that I'm visualizing has the ladder to the right of me, when in reality, it's to the left of me. It's pretty painful to watch because it's so obvious what the mistake is. I just need to update my mental model to say the ladder is to the left, not to the right. But this is the kind of thing that's almost impossible to correct for during a run. So it takes several minutes of smashing my head into the wall before I eventually find the exit.
Get in the room. Let's do backup save here. Oops. Let's go all the way this way first.
Finally, we've escaped the clutches of the water room. It's crazy to think that it took almost 5 minutes to get through a room that's like 10 feet long. But this just goes to show how fragile this run is, how a very simple mistake can cost a lot of time to correct for. Thankfully, the rest of the level is pretty straightforward.
Thank God. Okay. Next is missile silo.
You can hear there I got a little bit mixed up. I said next is missile silo, when in fact there's another level here before we get to the missile silo. Thankfully for us, the excellent sound design of Deus Ex comes to the rescue yet again. The sound profile of this area is so different from the sound profile of the missile silo that there's no possible way you would get the two confused. As soon as the map transition is done, you immediately know exactly where you are just by listening to the sound profile. And, speaking of sound design, that's also the reason we're able to navigate out of here so smoothly. As we approach the shore, we're going to start hearing the sound effect of seagulls. That gives us a really good audio cue that tells us when we're about to hit this ramp. Once we hit the ramp, all we have to do is execute a very simple super jump in order to leave the level.
Next is the missile silo, and there's a lot to unpack here. We're going to take advantage of the fact that Deus Ex is not particularly good at forcing the player to complete objectives. The last objective of the mission is to kill an enemy named Howard Strong. But if you somehow do that first, the game just assumes you've completed all of the other objectives, and you're allowed to leave the level early. So for more than a decade, speedrunners have been performing a trick shot to kill Howard Strong as quickly as possible, which skips almost the entire level. To do this, we're going to rely on a bug with our green rocket launcher, the Law, that allows it to fire through thin surfaces like doors and windows. In order to pull off the trick shot blindfolded, we're going to navigate to this corner of the level near the exit hatch, then execute a precise series of movement commands to position ourselves on the correct part of the hatch. From there, we simply look all the way down, crouch, look 1 unit up, and fire the rocket.
First try, mother.
As soon as you hear that infolink message from Bob Page, you know you've done it correctly. This trick is really special to me personally because for a long time throughout the routing process, this one trick was a lingering question in the back of my mind. Will it be possible to do this? So when I eventually found the setup, it was a big relief. It felt like the last puzzle piece to ensure that this run really will be possible. We've arrived at the final level of the game, Area 51. This level gives us a lot of flexibility in that there are several different paths to get into the bunker, and then once we're inside, there are 3 different endings we can choose from. So the route that I came up with starts by jumping up into this tower to get access to a computer. We can verify our location by whacking the wall with this sword and listening to the sound effect. From here, we just need to slide along the wall, repeatedly spamming the use key until we hear the computer turn on. Now, what makes this section so difficult, and the reason why I'm moving so slowly here, is it's just so friggin' noisy. We got Jock's helicopter behind us blowing up, NPCs are continuously chiming in with infolink messages, the room we're in has this really loud buzzer thing that goes constantly, there's an NPC patrolling nearby so his footsteps are distracting us. All in all, there's just a ton of noise to try to sift through. And on top of all that, the sound that we're listening for is very faint. We're going to hear it right here. That tiny little chirp sound effect is the only confirmation that you found the computer, so you really have to listen carefully for it. From here we can log in with a pretty strange username and password. It takes a bit of practice in order to be able to type this consistently, and then we can use a keyboard shortcut in order to open the blast doors. The silly mistake here is that after completing this, I forgot to turn on the super jump, so when I drop out of the tower, I die from the fall damage. And so I have to do this section all over again.
God, are you fucking kidding me? Okay, that's fine.
Just spotted a sniper in the tower. GC, got a problem. Somebody planted a bomb. Here's a satellite image of the damage from the missile. Page is weakened, but you still have to penetrate his bunker. I seem to be in remission, JC. Everett is right. The virus has some sort of on-off switch. Anyway, happy looking over your shoulder again. I don't believe
Okay.
it. JC, we lost Jock. All systems were operating normally on that jump.
A51,
It must have been a bomb planted by an MJ-12 sub.
XX15. Cool.
I get a little bit lost here trying to get into the bunker, but thankfully, unlike the 17,000 mistakes that I made in Paris, this time I actually remembered to quick save, so I don't lose a lot of time here. From here, we just need to drop down this big elevator shaft that's currently in front of us. Normally the fall damage would kill us, but by turning on an extra super jump, we can survive the fall. And this area is a little harder than it might look at first. It seems like it's super simple, you just walk off a cliff essentially. But there are a bunch of different pipes and beams and stuff all jutting out at crazy angles that make it difficult to find a straight shot to get all the way to the bottom. Thankfully, all of those obstacles are metal, and the ground floor is gravel. So as soon as we hear the sound of our feet hitting gravel, we know we've made it to the bottom.
Good work. You've reached the bunker. Page has extensive defenses to
This next section is a fun little action sequence. When we drop down onto the floor below, the blue tripwires will release some spider bots, which, remember, spider bots can chase after you even if you have dead man walking mode. And then right there's an electrical hazard that we need to jump over. So it's a pretty narrow set of timings in order to get past the spider bots and over the electrical hazard. Thankfully, I was able to execute it second try, and the rest of this section is pretty straightforward.
Come back to the communicator in Station 5. I can get you into Sector 2.
I'm always pleased to see one of my experiments perform so well. You aren't even afraid, are you? We got a lot of things right when we made you, didn't? But don't worry. I know you're...
This is the last locked door of the game. Instinctively, as soon as I start lockpicking it, I open up my inventory to do the lockpicking trick. The kind of silly thing is there's actually no reason to do this here. It's not faster to go into your inventory. The only reason we've been doing it this whole time is because it conserves the number of lockpicks we have. But it's the last locked door of the game. We don't need to conserve our lockpicks anymore. It's just pure muscle memory. As soon as I hear the sound of my lockpick activating, I always open up my inventory every time without thinking about it.
That you didn't know your mom and dad tried to protest when we put you in training. They love their little boy, JC. That's why they're dead. I'm sending up the man who did the job. Barely a scratch. You're a little faster on your feet than your daddy was.
We can get you at Everett.
We're into the final map of the game. One thing that I thought would be tricky about this section is that the door that we need to get through is guarded by a spider bot, which in theory, the spider bot should be able to attack us even when we have Dead Man Walking activated. But for some reason, this spider bot that you can see in the corner of the screen right now isn't attacking us. I don't know why that is. Maybe there are two different types of spider bots in the game files that behave differently but have similar appearances. I really don't know. So if you happen to know the answer to that, leave a comment below. Now that we're past most of the enemies, we quick save and quick load in order to turn Dead Man Walking mode off so that we can safely talk to this NPC up here. And here we are, the final room of the game. And fittingly, the last thing we need to do here is the single most precise button press in the entire run. So it really does act as the final boss. First part of the trick is we need to find a very precise part of the floor, one that we can't reliably get to just by counting our footsteps. So we're going to repeatedly scooch to the right while swinging our sword. And what we're listening for is the sound of the sword not hitting the mechanic in front of us. That tells us we're lined up correctly. From here, what we're trying to do is press that teeny tiny little button you see on the console in front of us. Normally, that button is protected by a little glass case, and you need to do a bunch of other tasks in order to unlock the glass case. But if you position yourself in a very precise location and look at a very precise angle, it's possible to hit that button while the glass case is still closed. So what we're trying to do is scooch around this NPC in a counterclockwise circle, and his body will guide us to the correct spot.
Knew they'd escape eventually. I knew it. They're still out there. They're still out there. Knew they'd escape eventually. I knew it. They're still out there. Knew they'd escape eventually. I knew it. We better wait.
At this point in the run, I'm totally exhausted. I'm super nervous because I'm right near the end and I'm pretty sure that I'm on record pace. The thing I want most is to just rush through this as quickly as possible, but you can't. You have to be patient, you have to trust your setup, you have to listen to what's happening and make adjustments until you get it right. And eventually, we do.
There we fucking go. Ooh, 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 ooh.
And there you have it. That's Deus Ex Blindfolded in under 3 hours. It's been a really incredible journey working on this project. Way more fun and fulfilling than I could have possibly imagined going into it. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. And if you're planning to try this yourself, good luck. There's plenty of room for improvement, so the world record is yours if you want it. Thanks, guys.